Okay, hello everyone. Hi, Conservation in Action students. Thank you guys so much for watching today's recording. Today, we're honored to have Yasmeen Ghavamian, who is a PhD student, a PhD candidate at the University of California, Davis in animal biology. Yasmeen's research focus is on animal behavior, welfare, personality, and all of which is particularly in captive gray wolves. Her recent studies at the Oakland Zoo and California Wolf Center have provided valuable insights into the personalities and problem-solving abilities of these wolves. So I'll let Yasmeen introduce herself more, but we are just going to do a quick intro and interview format for this class with some questions from class and some questions that I made up for specifically for your project. So yeah, hi Yasmeen, thank you so much for coming today. And if you could just briefly introduce yourself and the research that you've been working on throughout your PhD, that'd be wonderful.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. As you said, I'm a fourth year PhD candidate now, and so I'm at the stage of my dissertation research where I am writing my dissertation and doing data analysis. And so the past, 4 years has been full of academics and classes, field season, and doing data collection. So come a long way. It's 4 years flies by very fast.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So as I mentioned before, your research is mainly focused on gray wolves, specifically in captivity. I was wondering what first sparked that interest in animal behavior, specifically in wolves, and was there a defining moment that led you to pursue this field?
To pursue this field, yes, I did a master's previously and at Oakland Zoo with their sun bears. And so I've always had this passion for research, for better understanding animals, how to help them thrive in these zoo environments, but also better understand individuals. There can be just variation among individuals, how they experience the environment around them. Everyone has individual needs. And so that study that I had designed for my master's was an enrichment study. And essentially we provided puzzle feeding, foraging devices for the bears. And so that's what kind of fostered my interest in designing puzzles for animals, looking at how they, solve challenges. But when I got to Davis, I was fortunate enough to be uh, connected to an advisor that has studied these individual differences, her whole life, looking at these animal personalities. And I kind of fell in love with the literature, really resonated with this relationship between personality and problem solving that's been studied in a variety of species. And bold individuals tend to be faster at problem solving things just because they use as many behaviors as they can or physically capable of, whereas those that are shy tend to stay a little bit, further back or more hesitant to approach and might be a little bit more slower at it. But I was drawn to the research with big cats and coyotes and hyenas, and so I knew I wanted to study a social carnivore, and it sort of just clicked that I hadn't seen anything about wolves in the literature. And so we found this gap in the literature and kind of leaned on our network to see who would be interested and, willing to collaborate with us. Yeah, so that's how
Yeah,
we got to wolves.
that's awesome. Yeah, I was gonna mention, like, I wonder how your academic journey like shaped that research interest, but you mentioned your master's degree. So were you during your master's degree working with the Oakland Zoo as what would you say your role was within that? Just like a researcher on board with in collaboration with university and zoo? How would you say you navigated that?
Yes, exactly. So I did my undergrad and master's at Sonoma State University, and they had this relationship with Oakland Zoo as part of a long-term university zoo collaboration. And so we got connected to the research department at Oakland Zoo, and they often seek out outside researchers to help with studies, because sometimes having the staff or the time to collect data, and we can bring in additional funding to help as well, to help the zoo answer important research questions about the welfare of the animals. And so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, going off of that, I think I could ask this at the end, but I think it's a good time to ask that for an undergraduate, this class is mainly all undergraduates. So I was thinking, what advice would you give to students, particularly in the undergrad phase, who want to get involved in animal behavior or animal research?
Yeah, so as an undergrad, I started my academic journey wanting to be a veterinarian, and that was this. I had this love for animals for a long time, like many, I think, students that might take this class, and I realized I had to find kind of other avenues. The veterinary route wasn't fitting for me, but I became involved as a volunteer at San Francisco Zoo, and that's what really connected me to the world of zoo animals. And so that volunteer work was really special to me. I got to participate in a lot of husbandry um, uh, tasks, such as preparing diets, creating enrichment, but also connecting to the public, with these animals, doing presentations on their natural history. And so that volunteer work kind of, I think, was the foundation of it all. And so finding opportunities like that, local, not even, zoos, there's conservation centers, other wildlife rescue facilities. But the other vital part of that, of my academic journey, was being involved as a research assistant for a master's student. So we had a research lab on campus that had grad students. They had a PI, and it turns out the grad student, one of them, needed help with her project, and so it was on the sun bears at Oakland Zoo, and I got to help collect data, be on site, learn about what an ethogram is, and how to identify different individuals, what behaviors to look for. And so that was, a really fun part of it, and kind of solidified my interest to continue to do animal behavior research. And so I always loved biology classes. I loved, you know, writing and stats, and so I encourage others to look for those types of opportunities. Reach out to a graduate student, see if there's any way you can get involved in their research, because it opens up a whole new world, lots of doors. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great advice. I have also found opportunities to work with wolves that way. I'm working with the California Wolf Project right now on the Berkeley side. So, yeah, can attest that that's like definitely a way in. Um, but yeah, thank you for talking about that. But transitioning more into your research side of things, I wanted to get into how your research in particular kind of defines wolf personality, and what does that mean in the context of wolf packs? Why is it important to study?
Yeah, wolves are known to be very neophobic or fearful of new things. Just over centuries, they've had this very challenging relationship with humans, and so being cold, from their natural habitat, and so they've become more fearful naturally. But I think even within that fearfulness can vary among individuals. And so work that's being done in the wild, it's hard to study behavior in the wild, but what we can gather from that, and there has been research looking at personalities, these individual differences based on avoidance of human structures or landscapes as a way to, represent, those that avoid those areas less or are more likely to approach or cross roads, or more bold. But you know, we need more types of experiments to actually quantify that. And so that's what we wanted to understand with these wolves that, the population that I work with are also non-human socialized. They're not human reared, which is another thing that we see in research, different rearing environments. There's a lot of work that has looked at human socialized wolves and often in comparison to domestic dogs. And so we wanted to find a population that didn't have a rearing environment like that, because that can influence how they respond to new things. And so that's, how we came to be on that topic. But we really want to understand which individuals within this population have a higher threshold of fear, or which ones are actively seeking out challenges or exploring new things. And so, and tons of, I would say positive impacts for like animal welfare, management, conservation that can come from this, for such an endangered species. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think about that because that all that data and research can definitely be a use for a lot of captive programs and zoos and stuff like that. I think that aspect of the puzzle solving and enrichment activities is super super interesting to me, because as I was an intern during the time that you guys were there and you were directing your project, I always thought it was cool how you guys kind of assembled those puzzles together and like had them out for the wolves, and always found it interesting when I'd get updates on who finished the puzzle when. And yeah, I think it's a really good enrichment tool too. So how did you design your methodology for this project, and like what kind of challenges came up during that?
So one of the biggest challenges that comes with working with a social species is a lot of these tests, presenting an animal with a novel stimuli or with a puzzle box, um, are typically done in isolation. So you only look at one animal at a time, you look at their, response, but we couldn't do that with a social species. And so, and part of the study was, replicating a natural setting, for wolves. Being around pack mates is, in some way, can influence their response to new things and their maybe willingness to explore or engage. So social group testing was a big thing that we had to accommodate, and working with the staff, for the number of objects and boxes that we put out there, it had to be one per wolf plus an additional one, so that there would be no or limited opportunities for monopolization. Although that didn't always go that way, but so that everyone had plenty of opportunities to explore. But I mean, you know, creating those objects also presented its challenges. The thing with novel object studies is finding something that these animals have never seen before, and something that could induce, some kind of startle response, or which is typically what's done in these studies. Unpredictability. Other studies, open up umbrellas, or things like that, to look at that threshold of fear, which ones are, jump further away, that flight distance. And so that was really hard to come up with, and other studies have introduced bicycles or other, crazy objects that you don't think as a novel object. But so that was very hard, but luckily to work with the staff, and I had a lot of creative interns. And so, yeah, we created these objects with that in mind, and something that the wolves could discern too. So at least the novel objects we designed were blue and yellow. They had contrasting colors, so it was, um, you know, you know, it could stand out to them. Um, but I think the design of the puzzle box as well was also challenging. We went in with this we knew we weren't going to train these animals. It was they had to learn based on observation. And so I did get inspiration from a big cat study and a hyena study. Um, and, but the important thing was also being able to pilot test the puzzle box. So we had built it with the wolf hunting behaviors in mind, these pulling motions that they do with hunting, using their paws, things that how they interact with their environment. So that was the goal. And we did do pilot testing with some human socialized wolves to make sure that a wolf could open the box. And so obviously during data collection, when we learned how fearful they were, we had to adapt our methodology. We knew that they needed more time seeing the box, associating it with a food reward before even getting to that point where they could solve the box, and that took a long time. But yeah, that was kind of the methodology behind it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought of the testing phase, like the pilot phase of sorts. That's interesting. I never thought of that, but that's definitely important to know that the wolves can solve it
Yeah.
before you put it out there for real testing. So yeah, that's so interesting. Were there any of the findings that surprised you in any way?
Yeah, going back to that fearfulness. So we did 2 seasons of data collection. The first season was in summer of 2023, and we didn't really know how fearful they were until we got to day one of testing. And but I even saw uh, was already seeing individual differences between individuals and sites, just anecdotally. For example, at one of the study sites, it took 10 presentations of the puzzle box before a wolf actually grabbed food from inside the box. Whereas at the other study site that we went to after, um, one of the groups of wolves there was quick to take the food on the first 2 days of puzzle box presentation. And so I already knew that, there was um, it was just so shocking the difference, um, that some wolves needed more time to, get that motivation or courage to approach it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a major difference too. So when you're gathering this data on wolf behavior, are you doing kind of a mixed methodology, like where you're observing them directly? Are you taking videos of them? How are you collecting this kind of data?
Yeah, so personality data can be, I'm using 3 different methods. I'm doing surveys or questionnaires. This is common in zoo environments where you provide the staff that have a very intimate knowledge of working with these individuals with a survey with a number of different adjectives, bold, shy, you know, uh, active, and they rate all of the wolves on a scale of 1 to 5. And so we can use a survey method to get results like that and look at, multiple staff members. Do multiple people agree that this one wolf is rated very high on bold? Or, um, and so ratings, keeper ratings, and then behavioral observations. So we can infer personality from that as well. So I just, in addition to like my experimental trials, which we've been mostly talking about, I went out there to just get a day in the life of these wolves. So and that was just me in person with my Zoo Monitor app, collecting all this behavior live, just how they interact with their environment, how often they spend exploring, sniffing, how often they spend scent marking or engaging in social behaviors. And so with that, I can get, information on length of time they spend in these behaviors or how frequently. and then look for correlations among behaviors. Are those that are very exploratory, also very active and walking and running around? And then the behavioral experiments are those that are video recorded. And so that's because a lot of these behaviors are very quick, or we want to watch videos over and over to capture their response to novelty, these novel stimuli. And so all of these methods together, we can look at, correlations across. Are those that were rated as high and bold in the keeper surveys also those that were very active during the behavioral observations, and also those that made more contact with these novel objects? And so it's using multiple methods and never just one method to really, because it's looking at consistency across context. It's really important for personality.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, from your direct observation, did you notice that certain personality types are better suited for specific roles within a pack, or maybe they're more common in specific roles?
That's interesting. So, interesting question. How I describe a pack is wolf packs are based on, a family unit, naturally too in the wild. And so it's typically the breeding pair and then offspring, yearlings, pups. And typically we look at that as we can look at dominance relationships, in that way. Typically the parents are most dominant. They their role is to they have the most experience, right? They teach their young important skills before the young disperse on their own. And so if we're talking about roles in a pack, sometimes the young will help take care of young. They do cooperative breeding, cooperative hunting. But as far as wolf personalities, it's really hard to say with my current data set. I haven't really gotten that far into it, but I think I can tell you that, you know, you can't really say that the boldest individuals are the most dominant. That's often not the case. I know that there's some research that's still trying to disentangle if social rank means anything or if there's any relationship to personality traits. But it's really hard. I think it's more based on position in the family or age class. So those that had more experience, maybe, were more willing to approach new things. But even, for example, a lot of things that I saw were the same-sex siblings. So the sisters would engage in a lot of agonistic behaviors together. But the most dominant sister, like, hardly engaged in these experimental experiments that we did, or it was very rare for her to approach novelty. And so that's an interesting question, and I don't have a lot of answers to, but that's what I can kind of speak on.
Yeah, that's interesting that it might not be the dynamic that you immediately think of, whereas like the most dominant might be the most exploratory or something like that. Everything has a little bit of nuance in that way. So yeah, that's really interesting. I also wanted to ask, you kind of talked about this a little bit, but can you expand on like what is a typical day like for you when you're in the field, like using direct observation or even with the camera with the zoom monitor? What's that typical day like, and are there any like most fun or most challenging parts of that day?
Yeah, I mean, they can be very long days. Like for my behavioral observation days, we have to follow a data collection protocol. And so for me, it was I'd watch each wolf for 15 minutes and do that multiple times per day. So your and I have like before I even come to data collection day, to reduce any kind of bias, like we randomize which wolf I start with. And so you're never biased in who you start with or always seeing the same wolf, at the very beginning of the day. And so those were very full days, especially in the winter time. I would do like a morning session from like 8 a.m. to noon, and then an afternoon session. And so keeping up with those wolves was also challenging, them running around the habitat, um, me trying to find them, all their hiding spots. And so I had binoculars with me, but luckily we've moved away from notepads and pencils, and I have a digital app now, Zoo Monitor. And so that's what I'm using to collect my behavioral data. And then for the experiments, it's, yeah, charging those cameras, finding the predetermined spots that we had with the staff and setting them up and hoping for the best. We never knew what the wolves were going to do. And so they kind of did things on their own time. And it was a stepwise thing we had to follow, especially with the puzzle box presentation. But those trials were shorter in length. They were no more than 2 hours, because that's how long the batteries lasted on the cameras too. And there's only so much that you can record. Yeah, but we'd always go in the morning time when either the zoo opened or it was the first thing in the morning that we'd set up, the puzzle boxes or the novel objects and put out food if it needed food. And yeah,
Yeah.
cleaning the puzzle boxes, scrubbing them,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
blood or fur that came from the food that we gave them. Yeah, so it's hard work too.
Yeah. So follow up from that. I mean, I think a lot of people would be curious, what kind of food are you giving the wolves? Like, what was the incentive? And also, you talked about Zoo Monitor. What kind of database is that, I guess, in terms of like, how would you record your data? Like, is it uh, sort of like a notepadding paper where you record your observations like that, or is it more like structured where it has checkboxes? I was just curious.
Yeah, I can definitely speak on all that. So the food, yeah, we had to communicate with each center, I think individually about this, but what was available at the time or what we could order. But we wanted to be consistent at each location, or within each location. And so something that was highly valuable, we used rabbit. That was a very high value food reward. I think we used chicken for one, rabbit and chicken. And yeah, and then the Zoo Monitor app. So very cool software designed by, I believe, Lincoln Park Zoo. But the way that the system works is, it does both instantaneous sampling and all occurrences sampling. So instantaneous sampling is where we, have predetermined intervals, like 30 seconds or a minute, where we're recording a certain state. So I think I did 1 minute intervals for 15 minutes. So 15 intervals for one session for a wolf. And then every time my beeper went off, it would like alert me with a sound and I'd record what the wolf was doing, whether it was walking or it was sleeping or resting alert. And so I had my ethogram loaded all into it that, what all these behaviors were. And so that's like the instantaneous sampling, and it would give me a little beeper and I'd record the behavior on my iPad. And then the all occurrences sampling is just counting counts of behaviors that happen within that entire 15 minutes. And so that works for all the social behaviors. Like, oh, this wolf charged this wolf, and then I count that. Or, this wolf scent marked, and yeah, it just collects the counts, for each individual wolf, and I can rotate between my wolves on the screen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's funny that you mentioned Lincoln Park Zoo. That was my hometown zoo growing up in Chicago. So that's a fun call out. But I wanted to ask, are there any misconceptions people tend to have about wolves and that you wish were more understood in the public eye?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of negative perceptions of wolves that still stand. A lot of it, I mean, stems from fairy tales and mythology, but and with the current conservation efforts that are going on, especially in Colorado, reintroducing wolves into lands they used to be in, and there's this landscape of fear in a way, and it's learning how to coexist with wolves. They're not this big bad wolf. They're not, trying to harm us. That they're incredibly rare. They keep their distance from humans, and it's research like this that can help us better understand them. Understanding personality, understanding behavior is the start to being able to coexist with them. And so, yeah, I think understanding that, the role that they play in our ecosystem. And actually, in California, we have a coyote problem, and that's because we don't have many wolves. Coyotes and wolves used to, or still, have conflict with one another, and they help keep each other in check, and, put simply. And so having these apex predators is really important for the entire food chain and the ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And transitioning from there, I was going to ask how do you see your work contributing to conservation and wildlife management? You mentioned that your work can be kind of seen as kind of the beginnings of coexistence. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so what personality research has shown in terms of conservation is, um, previous work with other species shows that animals that maybe were rated more bold during surveys or experiments, upon reintroduction into the wild, they were least likely to survive, right? Those are them putting themselves in more risky situations. And so it's the hope that having a better understanding of personality can help us determine which individuals would be better suited for a reintroduction. But also that it requires incredible planning. You don't want to release all of the shy individuals, for years on end. There has to be some plan. You need both a mix of bold and shy. Bolder ones are going to disperse out when the population's ready. And so that's a start to, understanding, especially for those species that are part of reintroduction programs like the more endangered Mexican gray wolf. It's a subspecies. And so um, in other ways, looking at habituation to novelty in captivity, there we use or ranchers use non-lethal deterrents out on the rangeland to prevent wolves from entering into their livestock areas. And so better understanding what stimuli or what senses, are really important. We constantly need things that are changing because wolves can become habituated. And so learning things like that is really important as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely a unique way to kind of contribute, I think. But how have you collaborated with researchers from other disciplines? I mean, when you mentioned that coexistence, I was thinking like, have you collaborated with anyone from a psychology perspective, or I guess your work does include a lot of ecology, but yeah.
Actually, my work is a blend of psychology and ecology. I
Mm.
mean, my advisor, um, yeah, we take a psychology approach to animal behavior with the assessment of personality. And I've spoken with wolf biologists that, are starting to explore this, if we can do any kind of puzzle box testing with wild wolves, as has been done with, wild elephants. And so it's definitely still, I think, in the early stages, but yeah, seeing if we can take these experiments out into wild settings would be cool as well. Um, I know that's been done with, raccoons and coyotes, and understanding like how these urban mesocarnivores are, very intelligent, solving these, puzzle box tasks. And so this is just the start. And so hopefully we'll see more. It'd be great to collaborate with other researchers.
Yeah, definitely. And similarly, I was wondering, what do you hope that the public will take away from research like yours?
I mean, as I've said before, just maybe not judging animals based on, or not focusing on all the negative perceptions or common misconceptions that are out there, and being open to hearing new things, and open to understanding the species, and understanding why research like this is so important. You know, these, that's what I would say.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And just a few fun last questions for you before we wrap it up. If you could study any other animal's personality, which one would you pick and why?
Oh, oh, that's a hard one, but I mean, wolves have always been my favorite animal, so I kind of uh got that in the bag. Another animal. Uh, Gosh,
Would you stick to a carnivore if like a different carnivore?
maybe a different carnivore. Trying to think like what hasn't been done. But I think bear personality research is very understudied, and so I could go
Mhm.
back to bears, and um, they're quite, they're quite fun creatures to work with. So
Yeah.
even though they're
Also,
kind of omnivores, but yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I was gonna say also at the Oakland Zoo, so that's
Yeah.
nice. Yeah. Do you have any other any favorite books, documentaries, or media about wolves or animal behavior that kind of influenced you or you learned a lot from?
I mean, I can tell you, in my research, I learned about how flexible wolves are in adapting to their environments, and I came across these wolves that that their diet is mostly marine animals, and there is a Netflix documentary called Island of the Sea Wolves, which is really cool. Um, and I think it's a very short season right now, but they're filming more, and it's very interesting to see the life of these wolves that live live on the coast and hunt otters and other marine life. And so that's a really interesting series. And I'll also say I'm reading a book that I got for Christmas. It's called Thinking Like a Wolf, by Rick McIntyre. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And it's about this wolf biologist out in Yellowstone National Park and recounting his stories and experience. Talks about personalities of wolves and the struggles they experience and the heartbreak they experience. It's quite a good read. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll definitely have to check those out, especially the Netflix one. I haven't seen that one, so that's really interesting. Um, just a couple more questions. What is something that people wouldn't expect about during doing this kind of research?
Uh, I mean, gosh, all the writing and statistics that go into it. I mean, collecting the data is one thing, being out there watching animals is another thing, but it takes a long time to run analyses and put the story all together and, connect it to the literature. And so it's going to take me a year, but I promise publications will come out, hopefully. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's another thing with the, advice about students looking to go into grad school and PhD kind of thing is thinking about that realistic side of things. So, can you recap your timeline a little bit with your PhD? Was the first 2 years were kind of your field observation years, but you can go through it again?
Yeah, so no, my first 2 years were actually focused on my coursework and academics. And then I think it was end of my second year, starting my third year, when I started my observations and research. And so my third year was all conducting the research, the observations. My fourth year has been all doing coding videos, working with interns, because all those videos that we set out, all the cameras we set out to record, we have to extract behavior from them. So that just got finished like a couple weeks ago, and now it's the data analysis and writing.
Exciting. Yeah. Wow. That takes a lot of time and effort, but I'm so excited to see it published too. Last question of all, I know you don't want to show your bias, but is there any favorite wolf that you've worked with so far, and what made them memorable?
That's so hard, but gosh, yeah, I do have maybe one favorite that stands out, but one of uh uh the boys at Oakland Zoo, the sons, just how his name's Lassen, just how I don't want to say derpy, that's not a sciencey word, but he's just his features are so um I thought he was the most handsome wolf, but he was also quite funny. He was laying on one of those tables in the habitat with one of his sisters, and it was a kind of a smaller table, and he kind of rolled over, but almost fell off the table. It was one of my first few days of observations that I'll just never forget being out there. And but I see it all. You see them get the zoomies. They all have a special place in my heart. Yeah.
That's so cute. I remember Lassen. That's so nice. Yeah, he's a charmer. But yeah, Yasmeen, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your journey and insights with us today. Your dedication to understanding personalities and the needs of wolves, including like the goal of improving their lives in captivity, is really inspiring and incredibly important. So we're excited to see where your research leads you and how it continues to shape welfare practices and everything like that. So I'm wishing you the best with your work and beyond. So thank you again for joining us. I know my class is definitely going to appreciate this video. And if anyone has any questions for you or would like to contact you, is there any form of contact that you'd prefer?
Yeah, again, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed this chat. But yeah, absolutely. My email contact, it's ygavamian at ucdavis.edu. But if you just look up UC Davis Wolf Research, you'll find our lab. We're the Animal Behavior and Cognition Lab. My email's there. There's some a wolf video out there, some press media that we did. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to connect with others.
That's awesome. Thank you.